Hi, welcome to another video of Easy Breezy Math. On to this video today, what I wanted to talk about is percentages. Now, there's a lot to the story with percentages, but there's some simple ways to do percentages, which most of us will need a calculator. But there's also some ways we want to teach them to where people understand these percentages from a more natural, cerebral way, again, an intuitive way that we would learn percentages. For most people, let's say you're shopping and you're shopping in the store and you see that leather jacket that you want. It's $300, but notice that it's 15% off. So most people, what they're going to do is they're going to first figure out what 10% is. And if they know 10%, they're going to take half of that number because that would be 5%. And then they're going to put those together for 15% and then subtract it from the total cost. That's what we do in our heads automatically. But so that's kind of what the way we want to show it and we want to practice it in the classroom. Okay. So let's look at how you might see percentages on my sheet when I'm beginning and starting the concept of percentages. The first thing that you might see me do is really go a lot of 10%. Now, some people already know and they have a good idea that 10% of 100, and they'll know that one right away. Hopefully they do. If they don't, that's okay. Now, I say they might know this already because a lot of times I've taught adults and adults might take a look at this and they'll say, okay, I know 10% of 100 is 10. Like I say, great. That's a great place to start. We'll start right there. If 10% of 100 is 10, then what is 10% of 200? And what makes sense for that? If 10% of a 100 is 10, what is 10% of 200? Now, here I might get a lot of different answers, but right now we're going to kind of just go from what we're seeing. If we go from 10, well, 10% of 100 is 10. Really, we're just moving the decimal over one place there, from there to there, and we're getting 10. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to write down on the board. Okay, I'll write it the first time or we put the decimal right there. So it's 10.0, right? I write it, but guess what? I'm going to erase it because I don't really want you to do that. I want you to take a look at that every time in your mind and say, wait, how did they get to 10? Oh, we moved the decimal. I don't want to show it to you every time. I want you to think about it. So if I do that same operation here and just move that decimal over, what would I have? What's 10% of 200? Well, that would be 20. Makes sense, right? What's 10% of 300? Okay, that would be 30. All right. No big deal. Okay. If that's the case, the 10% of 300 is 30. What's 10% of 250? Again, now we might get the same answer. I might get some different answers, but we'll get there eventually. And eventually we'll get there to, well, it's just 25, right? Yes, it is 25. Okay. Moving that decimal over one, I get that it's 25. What's 10% of 180? Well, then that would have to be 18, right? Okay, okay. Now this comes more important to move that decimal because I actually have 3 numbers and maybe I did wanna move the decimal, but again, I want you to have to do the thinking about it and thinking, "How did I get that?" I don't wanna have to show you every little step. I need you in your brains. I need you in your heads thinking. So if I move that decimal over one time, I might get an answer of 29, but let's be accurate with our answer here, and we will use a decimal. 10% of 295 then would be 29.5. Okay. So that's our concept for 10%. We'll just do that in our heads. Most times people do that in their heads. They'll say, okay, well, maybe not this one, but the rest of these, a lot of people will get them in their head and we'll go. But as we keep going with percentages, you might see them written more like this on a page or a sheet that I would write for my class to study. Okay. First, it would say find 10% of 180. Now, I just moved the decimal over once, and plus we already did that one. 10% of 180 would be 18. Okay, so now 50% is one that most people know and understand to be half. A lot of people get this too. I could go from 10% and do some 50% just to show them right away that they do have that concept of percentages. Again, what I'm doing here is just reinforcing that concept of percentages, a number out of 100. It's a number out of 100, right? So here, 10% of 180 is 18. Yes, I had that mistake on there. No one's perfect. But what is 50% of 180 then? Well, that would be 90. Right. How? Well, half of 18 is 9, so half of 180 then would be 90. Okay, so that's 50% of 90. Okay. But if 10% of 180 is 18, what's 5% of 180? Well, 5% of 180 isn't 5 half of 10? If 5 is half of 10, what's half of 180? Or what's half of 18? And half of 18 we should know is 9. And now we start to see this thing. Look at the relationship between 50% and 5%. It just lost a zero, right? One of those zeros is gone, just like here it lost a zero. So it's all starting to make sense here. We want this story to be a real logical story, one that really makes sense. And in here, if 1% of 180, well, we didn't talk about 1% yet, but if we know 10%, we move the decimal one time, 1%, guess what we're going to do? Just like we lose a zero here, we move the decimal over one time again. So we move that decimal over one time again, and 1% of 180 then is 1.8. Okay. Now, what we'll do next is we'll start to mix these up. I could do things like 20% of 180, right? 20% of 180 would be two 10%, wouldn't it? It would be two 10%. So if I had that on here, I don't, but 20% of 180 would be 36, right? It would be two 18s. Two 18s equals 36. But here, that's the concept for how I get this last one. This last one here, I have 65% of 180. And so how could I find 65% of 180? Yes, I could change it to a decimal and multiply. I could do that, but that doesn't give me a true understanding of what 65% actually is. When I want to go and see if a number or a certain percentage makes sense, I want to understand it as much as possible so I can see right away if an answer makes sense or not, just based on my understanding of what percentages are. It's just a better way to think about it, right? So if I take 65%, I can think that 65% is made up of 50% plus 10% plus 5%. And it just occurred to me right now, you might not be able to see that. I'm going to rewrite it over here. It's going to be the 50% plus 10% plus 5%. Okay. Now, 50% was what? 50% was 90. 10% was what? Oh, it was 18. And 5% was 9. So if I add all these up, just like that 65%, if I add that up, if I add this column up, I'll get 9 plus 8, 8 plus 9, 7, carry the 1, that's 11. I get 117 for 65%. Now, again, I'll say it again. I can learn to change that to a decimal and multiply, right? But if I can take half of the number, add in 10%, go to 108, and then say, oh, well, I just need 5 more percent. 5, oh, it's 10 is 18, 5 must be 9, 108 plus 9 is 117. I can get that understanding of it real quickly. And I know if I punch the calculate numbers in the calculator wrong, that my answer doesn't make sense, or if it does make sense, we also want to understand this. Of course, I'll show them the other way. I'll show them how to change a decimal to a percent. But for understanding purposes and getting the deeper meaning of what's going on in math so that we're really good at things, we want to go ahead and teach it this way as well. So there's another lesson here in Easy Breezy Math. Make sure you like and subscribe. This is YouTube, and check out another video. Don't be afraid to go ahead and leave a comment and ask questions about how I do things. And I'd love to show you some more problems. I need some suggestions. I'm going to make a lot of videos. Stay tuned.